Hi, I'm Dr. Scott.
And I'm Dr. Shiloh.
And this is LA Not So Confidential, the forensic psychology and true crime podcast.
Each week, we explore the intersection of psychology, the criminal justice system, and entertainment.
And today, our episode is a true crime documentary review on Hell Camp: Teen Nightmare.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Shiloh. How are you, Dr. Scott?
I'm good. Good. It is
Good.
wonderfully rainy here. I mean, I love it. Like it's the only weather we get. I know. I love it.
No, it's been lovely because I'm on call, which part of me is like, bad guys tend to stay indoors here in Southern California when it's raining. So hopefully there's no call outs, but I'm kind of trapped at home anyway. Can't really go out and plan too much. So it's been nice to just like do a puzzle and do some podcast writing.
Yeah, exactly.
I did get called out last night and it did not rain on me the entire time I was standing outside. So that was very nice.
So I mean, we talk about it all the time, or maybe this is like the SNL, our version of the SNL version of the Californians, but people really don't know how to drive in the rain out here. So when I went to the gym yesterday morning after a night of rain, I passed 4 wrecks at 7 a.m. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. It was just crazy.
There's an article in the New York Times today talking about the trauma surgeons are calling dangerous driving in the US an epidemic at this point. Like the injuries they're seeing from dangerous driving is at levels that have not been around for decades. It's really scary. I mean, it kind of like made me think about back to our road rage episode and things like that. But yeah, you throw weather in there and I don't know, people are just throwing caution to the wind these days.
Yeah, I think it seems to be something like what kicks in. What I see happening is that people drive counterintuitively during the rain rather than slow down. They get impatient with the people that are slowing down and then they start weaving around and lose control. But that's a whole other episode and probably would bore anyone but me. But so we will concentrate on today's episode. But first, let me give you a recap of last week. So last week was part 2 of our series on crimes perpetrated by religious leaders. But this time we looked at the survivors and victims' experiences. We explored the consequences of religious trauma and violence by digging into the research and reviewing just a small selection of victims' own stories. And we fully want to acknowledge that there are, sadly and tragically, thousands upon thousands of victim stories of individuals who have survived this terrible abuse. We also discussed the disparity between how male and female victims are treated after they report abuse by the clergy. And we discussed ways of how to empower children to learn critical thinking skills as another attempt at reducing victimhood.
Yeah, I'm proud of that series that we did. I think it felt a little overwhelming to take on, but we've been getting some good feedback.
We have been getting good feedback, and I just don't want it for anyone to misunderstand that it is something that should be its own podcast, to the level of what Leah Remini is doing about Scientology. This needs to be explored with how many people have been victimized, and not just sexually, but also forced labor camps for kids, working for the church. It's terrible stuff.
If anyone knows of a good podcast, I'm sure someone's done it. Let us know.
Yeah, we'd love to put it up.
So this is a point where we talk about what we're watching or listening to or reading.
Yes. What are you doing? What have you been catching up on?
Did you guys watch Saltburn?
We haven't watched it yet. We've been, because Dan is part of the Academy. So we have the app and we watched, we kept
The Academy has an app now. They don't just send you these cool DVDs anymore.
No, we don't. Thank God. We used to have trunks and trunks of VHS tapes that I had to get rid of because they're all watermarked. And then we had trunks and trunks of DVDs. I mean, it was like this incredible waste of resources. But we watched The Holdovers with Paul Giamatti.
Oh, okay.
It's fantastic. It's really, really great. And then Poor Things. Am I getting that right? Emma Stone. Started out hating it, thinking this is Frankenhooker. This is an expensive version of Frankenhooker. And then within 20 minutes, I was like, this is freaking amazing.
Oh, cool.
There are so many layers to it. It's very graphic, very, very graphic, full frontal nudity, graphic sex scenes, but a really fantastic sort of magical realism story that I think I'm amazed it got made, and every actor in it is fantastic.
Oh, good. Well, I mean, it should prep you for Saltburn.
Okay.
When you're ready.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
I mean, anything with Rosamund Pike, I'm like, yes, please.
I know.
I mean, she was so excellent in this and she is in everything,
Yeah.
but it's kind of interesting to see her as a little bit more of a muted character and she still fucking kills it.
Yeah.
Like,
That's what I've heard. That's what I've heard. But
Yeah.
let me finish before you.
Yeah, no, do it.
We watched also Reacher, season 3 of Reacher, which it's on Amazon Prime. If it's with Alan Richson, it's based on a series of novels about an ex special forces military guy.
Yeah.
It's really, really good. It's a lot of nods to cop procedurals in the 70s with almost like comic book levels of violence.
Huh.
And Alan Richson is like this sort of, he's a nerd in like a superhero's body. Like, I mean, as a person, like his in interviews, he like, you want to hate the guy, and then you read interviews with him and you're like, holy crap, you're like Chris Hemsworth. You're like kind of an amazing person.
The full package.
Yeah. But yeah, that series is good. Although there was something in the end of this season 3, there was like this weird positioning that felt a little bit political with a particular worldview that was like, oh, I'm not sure about this, but enough about that. Also, we just started the first season of Life and Beth with Amy Schumer, and I know people think of her as a very controversial performer. There are some people I like her too. I like her voice. I like her perspective, and this show is really, really interesting. It's not. There are some over the top funny moments, but it's a great take on trauma and trying to be an adult. Lessons in Chemistry, I think I talked about last time, is a 1-season show based on a book. Highly, highly recommend. And I'm about to start Fargo. So I've got like 5 seasons of a show to watch. I'm very excited about that.
Well, I mean, kind of in the vein of Fargo is the new season of True Detective.
With Jodie Foster.
Holy crap. Did you watch the first episode yet?
No, not yet. We're going to just watch it tonight.
I almost feel like we should do like a little mini watch review of this on Patreon or something, because it is good and it's super creepy and super weird. And yeah, Jodie Foster. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
But
so good.
Yeah. And it's so funny because before you and I jumped on today, I told you that I watched American Nightmare and you had just started it. And I'm like, every time we pick a documentary that I feel like, okay, we're on the pulse of things with Hell Camp, it's like another one comes out and I'm like, will anyone even give a shit by next month? But it's very good. I mean, I'm sure everyone out there has binged it this last weekend, but definitely so I also told Dr. Scott as a result of this, and by the time you guys hear this, it will be up because I'm going to get it done this today, but I'm going to make some merch that says, do your job like you're going to end up on a Netflix true crime docuseries one day.
Yeah.
So that's my takeaway from American Nightmare.
And it may be our next one. So there you go.
We'll see, but we can move into today's a different nightmare. So Hell Camp Teen Nightmare is a 2023 Netflix documentary directed by Lisa Williams, who also did the Yorkshire Ripper back in 2019, which was good. I watched that. It was well done. Hell Camp is a 90-minute standalone documentary that dives into the stories of teens who survived the wilderness reform camps run by the Challenger program. As viewers, we get to hear from the now grown teen survivors, their parents, and some of the people who worked for this program that really blurred the lines between discipline and abuse. So just to give you a little taster, the Rotten Tomatoes score, which is an audience score, is just a measly 50%. So whether you've seen this or not and you agree with that, let's get into this.
Yeah, it's an interesting score. I'd be so interested. I think I'm going to go back and see if people were actually writing reviews, because I'm not sure why it got 50%. Because as we'll say later, and we'll dive into a little bit more, is like, I think the subject matter is absolutely vital to talk about. Like it's a frightening phenomenon, and like it or love it or hate it, this type of abuse in these camps is still occurring, and these organizations continue to exist without oversight. You know, that's sort of the pinnacle of what needs to be focused on here in regards to this issue. But let's talk about how this documentary is laid out. This documentary is primarily interview based, with bits of footage from different sources, a lot of home video that was taken, not really any reenactments. I don't think there are any reenactments at all. There's no animation, thank God. And the interviews are really the meat and potatoes of this doc. In prep for this particular documentary, which I texted you, I was at the gym on the elliptical watching it. Within 10 minutes, I texted you about how much I hated it.
Yeah.
Like I hated it, but not because of the documentary itself or the style or discussion of content, because I hadn't really gotten into that, but for what this particular topic represents, as opposed to other true crime documentaries, what it says about us as a society, what it says about the laws in this country. I mean, this is about organized intent, cult-like thinking, sometimes irresponsible parenting, and very irresponsible media. But
I think a lot of people had that reaction. Like they were just angry all the way around.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that is it. Like, how can this happen? Especially when we're looking at it 20 years later, like where we really have a different view of these things. So one of the things that we have not done and probably should have prior to beginning this particular section of our podcast is to talk just a little bit about the various styles of documentaries that are out there. They're not all alike, but they can be broken down into about 14 to 16 different categories. Don't worry, folks. I'm not going to go into all those categories, but Hell Camp, rather than being biographical, historical, or what we call participatory, where the filmmaker becomes a part of the story, Hell Camp is expository, and expository documentaries have this aim to inform, to educate an audience by presenting factual information and then analysis in this, what is hopefully a straightforward and objective manner. But that's not a completely clear and truly objective description of what Hell Camp does. The editing frames a very particular narrative, and not one that you disagree with because you're so angry, but there's no third-party subject matter experts to objectively frame the data that's presented. And that, I know, gets frustrating for people. It gets frustrating for Dr. Shiloh and I when we're watching documentaries and we're going, oh, great, they're going to have an expert on. And then it ends up being somebody that should never be allowed in front of a camera or a mic at all, or just the opposite, somebody that's like, hey, hold on. This is what that means. You know, you can look at this. There's none of that here. So there's none of that in this documentary.
So let me ask you this. Would you have wanted that in this documentary? Do you think it needs it?
Well, I think we talk about this in our reviews later on. I mean, in our rating later on. I think that this is so important that it needed to be more. There's more to it than just the story of the guy who founded it. And that's what they're actually focusing on. In fact, I think they focus on it more than they do the victims' stories. And that's another point, is like, there are a lot more victims out there, and these are the only ones you got. Maybe these are the only ones that allowed their stories to be told, or maybe the other stories were too controversial. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't think I was left at the end saying, gosh, I wish, there was a subject matter expert explaining this, or this to me. I think it flowed well in that sense. I know you and I always are like, why do you just give them a 30-second soundbite? And maybe that's the frustrating part when they do have them, but it's very, very limited, then rather just not having them altogether, like in this one.
So let's do this then, because this is not really in our outline today, but let's see if we can try and do this. As we're going through the documentary and the points that we're going to bring up, let's try and locate points in the timeline where a subject matter expert would have been helpful.
Okay.
You want to try that? Okay.
Yeah, I'll try to keep that in the back of my brain here. But before we get into the people interviewed, let's start with what this Challenger program is all about, because the doc really just focuses on this one company, as Dr. Scott said, particularly the CEO of this company and the abuse that occurred within. So the various iterations of the program highlighted here were under the umbrella of the Challenger Foundation, which was an organization founded in 1988 by Steve Cardizano. He was a retired sergeant and instructor from the U.S. Air Force and a military special forces officer, supposedly. So targeting disobedient teenagers, the Challenger program employees surprised them in the middle of the night and transported them to a wilderness camp in Utah. Now I'm just thinking, like, surprise them in the middle of the night. That sounds so campy compared to what it actually was. Right.
And it's hundreds and hundreds of kids. One of the first now adult victims or survivors, a woman who was interviewed, explains how she thought she was being kidnapped, just in the middle of the night, in the dark, a couple of hulking figures who shove her in a car with really kind of stupid ass code names. I just like that. That's the beginning of a whole set of like ridiculous things. They have code names. They give her a note like torn on the back of an envelope from her parents that says, "We just think it's for the best." And while it's not clearly stated in this documentary for all situations, it is very much implied that in order for the kids to be transported, the parents had to sign over full release forms, giving over parental rights to the organization, because if you don't, you're kidnapping.
Yeah, I
Right.
guess so.
So
Yeah.
this is referred to in one specific situation, but it's not in others. And
Mhm.
that is a big problem in the documentary. They don't do this in the documentary. They don't explain how this was allowed to proliferate. What
Right.
emerged over the years is that the Challenger and other similar organizations basically kidnapped the kids.
Parents were charged exorbitant bills exceeding tens of thousands of dollars for this so-called obedience training. And during what I kind of refer to as phase one of what we get in this documentary, their minimum 63-day stay at this air quotes therapy camp, the adolescents were compelled to hike 500 miles through the desert, sleep on the ground, pull hand carts through rocky terrain, and engage in activities such as skinning and cooking animals. Punishments range from carrying rocks in their backpacks to staff tying campers up by their hands and feet. We actually see some of the footage, which is taken from TV talk shows, where Steve Cardisano says, "It's not what me or my staff does, it's Mother Nature." And I'm like, really? Because is Mother Nature tying them up? Anyway, we'll get into a lot of that, the mental gymnastics.
Yeah. Also, this is going to be a strange frame, but I think it's important. Cardizano is a good looking man. You know, he's a good looking guy, striking looks, like tan, big, beautiful smile, beautiful eyes, dark hair. He is well spoken and he is confident.
Ooh.
He is
Yes.
incredibly, incredibly confident. And the bullshit that comes out of his mouth is so completely uninformed, but it doesn't matter because he is so confident about it that everybody just sits in the audience in these talk shows
Yeah.
and nods their heads. I mean, he just says one bullshit thing after another. In one interview clip, he mimics a child saying, "Oh, my back hurts," in a mewling, kind of whining tone. And then he quickly notes, "See, there's nothing in the medical record that indicates any kind of injury." However, this is another point where they drop the ball because there's no reference in the documentary as to how much medical information Challenger program did have. What is very clear, though, is that Challenger was a dumping ground for any type of problem kid. We've talked about this in the past when you used to be able to, if you were having an argument with your wife, you pay off the judge and you get her committed to the mental institution.
Mm-hmm.
This has a parallel to this. The Challenger was a dumping ground. It's clear to me clinically that there were a mix of kids with significant behavioral issues, substance use issues, mental health issues, along with kids that were basically just being problematic teenagers that were likely not even outside the parameters of expected developmental behavior. At one point, an observer stated, you know, you had real kids with real problems put together with kids who are just basically couch potatoes.
Okay, so this would have been a great point to have a subject matter expert, I think, talk about what does troubled teen actually mean? Because I think they kind of frame it at some point in this documentary about just kind of like the tone of the country at that time, right? Like war on drugs and, you know, Nancy Reagan, DARE program, and
all of these things that failed.
All these things have failed hard, but also that just to me was like, God, are you implanting like all of this stuff on parents of how they should be like demonizing or looking at their kids' behavior in such a way that maybe is just really normal developmental rebellion or what have you? So I think this would have been an interesting, like to peel that back culturally and socially, perhaps with like a sociologist to look at that period of time, but also to tell us what is a troubled teen? What does that even mean?
Yeah, exactly. That's a wide definition. And so again, as we said, these interviews are set up from survivors telling their stories. And in some cases, they even have their parents talking about why they sent their kids to these programs, which I think is helpful. Parents often tell themselves if they're sending their kids to wilderness camps to provide them with opportunities for personal growth and character development. At least this is what they're telling themselves that they're doing, or they're repeating back what the brochure said in bright colors and pretty font. What we don't get from the few people that do participate in these interviews is that they did feel they were at their wits' end. So we get a little bit of that, but we don't have any context. Like, in order to tell, like, how bad was this? You know,
or what else had they tried, or, you know, had struggled. And
exactly. Yeah. I mean, we're not told about what interventions were attempted prior to basically having your kids hauled off in the middle of the night, right? So look, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there actually is a place for programs like this. And there are some that are actually really well done. And the ones that are really well done are set up by and structured by therapists that use like real treatment techniques. Well-organized camps can offer this unique environment where the participants can learn life skills that can lead to the development of resilience. They can foster, or they can emerge into a sense of self-reliance, and then also connect them with other people so that they maybe are getting a level of connection they weren't getting at home or getting at school through teamwork. But they also, especially in today's world, they offer this opportunity to disconnect from technology and maybe connect with nature. Maybe they, you know, some people haven't had an opportunity to do that. Wilderness camps can challenge people to overcome obstacles, build self-confidence, self-esteem, and an awareness of their own strengths. And then these programs, though, are specifically focused on outdoor experiences, right? Not everybody enjoys that, right?
True.
So if it's not something that people enjoy, but they're willing to go into it in order to build all these positive attributes, that's one thing. But forcing kids to haul backpacks full of rocks mile after mile after mile when they have been basically sedentary is akin to torture. Yeah, so that's the best possible description. And Challenger and its mutant offspring were none of these great things. They were the worst of the worst. So you had put a note in here, and like we underlined the word duped by the brochures as far as the parents were concerned. And I wonder, is it duped versus what they wanted to hear? You know, I have a lot of compassion for families that are struggling. I get it. I really get it. That is the environment that I work in.
Well, and towards the end, you know, one of the parents says that he was asked, how could you send your kid here? Right. And he said, that brochure exactly described my child. Like, I think the crafting of the wording of this brochure, and we figure out kind of the bombshell at the end of this documentary, why they know how to target what those parents are feeling so much. But I think it was very carefully crafted towards the clientele that they're trying to get these thousands of dollars from.
Right. And remember that even before the brochure, you basically called a number and started talking to Steve, and Steve, sold it, because there is a really, there are a couple of moving interviews. One of them is an adult man who is very well spoken. He seems calm and responsive, and he's talking to his elderly father, and his elderly father comes off like an asshole.
I know.
Like, is not asking for forgiveness at all. And this now adult survivor of the camps is traumatized, and it's very clear that he's traumatized. But look, back to the issue of what the parents thought that they were getting. Even the best parents, even the best families are going to find themselves in situations where they have these types of issues with kids occasionally. It's not as prevalent as Steve really liked to push, and there's a reason he liked to push that. Substance use in teens is not a one-stop answer, easy answer for a fix for all of them. So much of the time we default to this idea of the influence of other teens or neglect at home or even abusive situations. We don't talk enough about the consideration of genetic and medical factors that may make some kids more prone to substance use or addictions than others. Where was the discussion of this? Again, a great opportunity for a subject matter expert to come in and start discerning between the types of interventions that really should be considered. This was
there's no like wraparound holistic care
Right.
approach to this for the myriad of things that these kids could be going through. They were just all literally treated the same.
And by the way, there's no excuse for the timing. Yeah, I get that this is like 20 plus years ago. We had therapeutic communities then. We had like treatment communities. There's information out there. Like there was great family therapy happening at these times. So this was just all driven by Steve and his attempt to get money, right? And what's interesting too, in the last iteration of his program, the last one that fell apart, he had finally kind of hit the ground on marketing in that he had hired a production crew with a director and actors to play out these roles that presented like this very sanitized view of what was happening while on a boat. So these people are thinking, well, they'll fix my kid and my kid will get to sail around the world as a result, or sail around the Caribbean. And that is not what happened.
Well, and we even get a little blip from Steve's wife later that's like, when I met him, he was studying filmmaking. Like,
yeah,
maybe he was in the military, but this was a guy that lived in fantasy land a lot of the times. You know, it's really interesting. You bring up some points that just have me thinking now. I wonder of the families that sent their kids, again, kind of thinking back to possibly what they had tried before, how many of them had tried family therapy? Because I think there was probably a good level of defensiveness, again, in this culture at the time, you know, late 80s, early 90s of, well, there's nothing wrong with me as a parent. Why would I go to therapy? You know, please just like fix my kid, a sort of mentality, which I think could inhibit people from, you know, engaging in therapy themselves and with their family. So,
yeah, I mean, one very clear example of this is that there's an individual who is interviewed that appears to be neurodiverse.
Yeah.
And all I could think was that poor individual, and I don't mean poor in a diminutive way. I just like, it really punched me that this individual had to go into that situation and deal with these challenges and was tortured, basically tortured.
Yeah.
And that's never addressed either. And of course, they are allowed to determine what they share and what they don't share. But that was something that was really prominent to me.
Yeah. So pretty quick in this documentary, we hear from one of the main Challenger field directors that was involved very early on when the program was still in this phase 1 Utah.
Let me take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath because we need to talk about Lance Horsehair Jagger. So he's also an Air Force vet. He's someone that Steve recruits to be the man on the ground, yelling in the kids' faces. So what do we think about him?
When we meet I'm gonna let you start.
Okay. I'm just looking at some of your notes here. So, you know, we get a lot of back and forth from a lot of people that are interviewed in this that knew Steve personally. And I think this is probably deliberate with the documentary, where you hear them not really take a whole lot of responsibility for what was done and their role, yet they talk like it's all coming from a good place and a greater belief. And part of me is like, okay, so Steve kind of sold this to his friends, his family, his staff members, which I could see them being duped into it as well. But there's a lot of excuse making from Horsehair about the program and why they really thought that this was going to work with some tough love and Mother Nature, when there's just zero background to give any legitimacy to this man's thoughts or expertise in this area. So, you know, there are moments like he's very well spoken. I wanted to like him. You know, as we meet him, he's balding and sitting on his couch and, you know, hooked up to an oxygen tank. And I think he wanted to believe in a program like this, but he also seems like, I feel like some of the staff members are just as lost as some of these teens. And that's the cult-like piece, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like the
Absolutely.
cult-like thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that you have a little bit more of a balanced tone than I am able to have for him. My problem with, and for those of you who haven't seen, I'm going to paint a picture of this guy. So like Dr. Shawley was saying, when we see him, you know, sitting on this chintz couch in a paneled room somewhere, It's kind of dark. I mean, it doesn't look like the greatest. I don't know if they chose not to light him well or whatever. And so we're seeing an elderly man with clearly medical issues because he's on an oxygen drip and he's unrepentant. The only thing that he says is, well, I mean, I guess maybe we were a little bit hard. There was something like that. But he's very much still of the mindset that this is the answer and that kids have it too easy and that they are this. And then you get to see who he was at the time, and he's a complete buffoon. He is a complete buffoon cosplaying. I mean, he's a cosplayer.
Right,
he is wearing like a pirate shirt with two enormous sort of Native American-esque turquoise and silver necklaces and armbands and like a big thick belt across his blouse, as it were, and a head wrap. And he's got like the aviator sunglasses and a big beard. And he's screaming shit into children's faces. It is the worst of Scared Straight. And he, you know, the idea, this is where I get inflexible with him, is that he takes, at least in what we are presented, maybe there's tape that they left on the cutting room floor, he takes no real responsibility for traumatizing kids. He takes none of it. He's a sycophant. He's a follower. He's a true believer. And he was a narcissistic source for Steve. I can tell you right now that there is a like he felt completely fed into that cult behavior. And what's odd is that for his stance, he answers questions. You know, you just get a feeling about kids. You just get a feeling, you know, when they come in, you get a feeling. So clearly there's no real exposure, treatment, capability, nothing
backing to anything.
And I go so far as to saying, to me, all funniness aside, I mean, or all humor aside, looking at him, I think he's the second worst guy in the cult. Like, I'm just saying, if we look at cults, this is the second worst guy who has a lack of identity themselves. So they are second in command in order to have a sense of power. He's the guy in Guyana walking around with a machine gun, making Jim Jones's followers drink the Flavor Aid. I completely, because he is a true believer. And it's a miracle that more people weren't hurt under that type of belief system.
Yeah. So on that note of like being sort of the second guy and like the enforcer, almost comes back to another psych concept that we see later in this, when some of the kids who are there are kind of promoted to this junior staff and then are inflicting abuse on each other, is just the power of authority.
Yeah.
Like
it's Lord of the Flies. And even one of the victims, one of the survivors says that. She goes, it quickly just turned into Lord of the Flies.
Yeah. It's total what Nazi structure was built on, right?
Yes,
like just unfettered authority and following authority and the power that has. And we see, I think we really see the power when it does start to trickle down to the kids that are there. But yeah, this guy's just like, we should treat these kids like they're in boot camp. And I know like young people go into the military and experience boot camp, but they're still adults. You know, they're not 12, 13-year-old kids that are crying at, you know, the first moment of being yelled at in the face. It's like the juvenile criminal justice system. We can't treat them like short adults, right? Yeah. That's what the saying always is, but that was clearly their mentality for this. So, okay, let's move on past horse. Towards the end of the doc, you know, we also get to hear from some of the other Challenger staff members who were younger at this point, you know, kind of in the later phases, and particularly ones who were working the boats. So we get a little bit of insight from them, but just very, very short. But it's easy to see, like, again, who knows what bag of goods they were sold as far as like being camp counselors and coming on this cool trip, because they were clearly at the mercy of the crudeness of this whole program too. I mean, practically starving themselves. It's not like just the kids were treated badly when this got later down the line.
Yeah. That there are clear examples of kids that are emaciated, like over and over, covered in scars, covered in half healed over scars, bug bites, lice infestations, all sorts of terrible stuff like that. And of course, we never hear directly in interviews from the CEO, Steve Cardizano, because he's now deceased. He died of cancer, but you do see him through multiple photos and TV show appearances because he liked being in front of a camera. Again,
yes.
very, very, very confident. And we also hear from his wife and one of his adult daughters, which also adds to some very interesting perspectives in the documentary.
Yeah. So I know you said that he's good looking, but don't you think he has total shark eyes?
Total shark eyes.
Just dead.
Well,
right?
It's just dead. There really is. There's no micro facial expressions in his occipital area. There just isn't. And that's very telling. I mean, I'm not an expert in those type of things. That's something that we do have entire areas of marriage counseling that are based on micro facial expressions. But while he has a lovely melodious voice and he uses it to be very convincing and he has a nice smile and photographs well, his eyes are really telling.
Yeah. So maybe the people in those talk show audiences are like, gosh, he's just like no micro expressions. He's very confident. And then us and our listeners are like, shark eyes. Yeah. Watch out.
Exactly. Also, did you see Oliver North? In the documentary, they don't refer to him.
I did.
Oliver North is there, like hugging him, shaking his hand. I'm like,
I thought I was going crazy.
I thought I was too, and I went on Reddit. By the way, Reddit has more information on survivors of these experiences than the documentary does, and they are horrifying. But they were like, oh yeah, that's Oliver North showing up. Like, here you are, like kicking kids' asses, doing the right thing. But
yeah. I saw it and I was like, God, that guy really looks like Oliver North. But okay. So as far as the footage goes, we have the interviews and then we have the footage to rely on here. We get to see some of the wilderness camps in the desert that was, like you said, likely shot by the Challenger program itself. You know, you do see kids pulling these crates and these trucks through the desert with the rocks in them, but some of it shows the kids being interviewed by the staff about their experiences. And I mean, you want to believe it, right? Because some of these kids are just like, I'll be a good kid again. I'll listen to my mom. I had to come here and my mom wrote me a letter that she wants me to come home. But if I went home now, like this would all be for nothing. And I'm like, this is great footage for roping more parents in.
Yeah. Yeah. But then again, the other part is like, I wonder how many kids were sent there just for talking back to their parents. Because I think that happened.
Oh, totally. Totally.
I think that happened as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. But you do also see kids breaking down, right? Like really breaking down because they're carrying rocks in their backpack and crying. And the physical labor, they're not shying away from this. If the Challenger program is filming this for whatever reason, I mean, I'm sure they're not putting all of this into their promotional footage, which also gives me kind of a gross feeling in my stomach of like, is this just for them? Like, why are they filming this?
Yeah.
Is it to show back to the kids later?
And they
like,
never explain that, like where's all this coming from, except when you later see that some of it is parental, like stuff that the parents shot.
Well, yes. Yeah, certainly. Yeah. There is that other video footage.
Certainly one of the most compelling parts of the documentary and the turning point of this phase 1 in the Utah desert is when we learn of this death of a 16-year-old girl named Kristen Chase, and that occurred in 1990. She died of a heat stroke during an unbelievably strenuous desert hike. And we hear from her now elderly mother and her brother as they painfully recount sending her to the camp and then learning of her death. So, okay, I know we're kind of rushing through certain parts of it, but that's kind of how the documentary is structured. So faced with a bunch of pending court cases, Challenger Foundation doesn't have any choice, but they have to cease operations and they have to file for bankruptcy. So Steve Cardizano is now facing charges of child abuse as well as negligent homicide in connection with Chase's death. And I mean, I was really gobsmacked by this, like, because not knowing the whole history of it, I didn't realize that he was acquitted of all those criminal charges, and that the parents of the deceased girl filed a federal lawsuit against the camp and Cardizano, and the legal battle was eventually resolved in 1994 with a settlement of a little over $250,000. But it just seems like a slam dunk. Like, you didn't check this. She was not hydrated. There weren't people there monitoring. How could he not be responsible for that? How's that possible?
Well, I
We
think
don't
it's
find out why.
Yeah, my only thought is that paper that those parents signed was ridiculously airtight in
Oh,
favor of him in the program.
could be. No, good point.
I
Yeah.
mean, and poor Kristen, like I think the sheriff who got called into the investigation was
The
like
voice of reason, by the way.
the
Yeah.
only voice of reason. I know, but he's like this young girl, like she can't be going on hikes like this. It's not as if she had been working out strenuously, like you said. You know, if there are kids that they're just taking sort of out of the homes that have been sitting on the couch, and then you're going to put them in this, gosh, I don't know. It just makes me sick and sad.
Well,
And
but I'm glad you brought that up because that is really an important part. You get to see him as an elderly man, and then there's some clips of him as a young deputy. And he's one of the ones that says, like, I figured it out. I mean, he didn't say I figured it out, but he's just observing. I knew immediately, like, why are you mixing all these kids? There are some kids that are troubled individuals. They've got criminal thinking, criminal acts, and you're mixing them with kids that are just sedentary or had poor relationships with their families, and then dumping them in this harsh environment that not even residents navigate it this way. Right. You don't do that.
Yeah.
And then they cut back. Then they cut back to Horsehair, where he goes, "Oh yeah, I guess there were some things that could be seen as abusive." Well, no shit, Sherlock.
Yeah.
Oh, annoying. I'm sorry. I get so worked up about this.
Well, so after Kristen's death and the legal resolution, if we want to call it that, Cardizano's reputation takes a severe hit. I mean, you think? Okay. Yeah, as it should. However, surprise, surprise, this did not dissuade him from persisting in his questionable camp ventures. So his subsequent project is called Healthcare America, enter phase 2 here. And this mostly takes place on a sailboat. So yes, a boat. They put teens on a boat to learn life lessons while practically starving them. They sail around. They're now in the Bahamas, maybe anchor somewhere every now and then and camp and be able to, get some food, but they're basically on the water for months at a time, really on like what looks like a tiny boat. I mean, I don't mean tiny like a,
like a rowboat. We're talking about but it's not.
It's a sailboat.
And at one point when it really falls apart, there's like 6 kids on a catamaran.
Yes.
Which is like mind-boggling.
I know. So they're out of St. Thomas for this program. But I mean, they sail as far as Costa Rica. They hit up all of the Bahamas, just kind of floating around. And this program finally ends up coming to the attention of authorities in St. John. And they start doing a little bit of digging and realize there are no permits for this business. It's like totally under the radar, totally covert. He's moved out of the Utah desert now into this sort of what he thinks is no man's land where no one's going to uncover his con. And the authorities end up getting involved. The program faces closure only after some maltreated and unkempt teenagers were discovered tied to a car on an island somewhere.
Right. They had attempted to escape. They were like, this is bad, you guys. We have got to get to the consulate. We got to get to police. And then one of the camp workers, like, no, you're not going to do that, ties them to the back of a car. And the local townspeople are like, why are these ragged children tied to a car? And they call the police on them. It's just, you talk about the behavioral drift. How did that camp counselor, as it were, or, how did they get to the point where they thought, I am allowed to tie children up and tie them to the back of a vehicle?
Yes, I would love to know more about the instructions they were given. Because is this behavioral drift because they're just like kind of in this willy-nilly environment anyway? Or is it like, oh my God, Steve or Horse, whatever, is telling us, do not let them get away by any means necessary. Again, kind of going back to the authority piece. It's really
I think at this point, Horsehair is out of the picture. I mean, this is years later, but
Horsehair, whoever's on the boat.
Exactly. I mean, there was one quote that Horsehair makes where he just goes on, they just let him talk. So he's digging himself in deeper and deeper. And he goes on to justify spanking, equating it with hard corporal labor and saying, we just parents don't spank enough. And it's really no different from what we were doing in the wild. He's really just a complete simp to Steve's narcissistic control. I think he goes on to say, hey, I'm sorry, I might be old school, but we need parameters. Okay, who knew that we would actually find some place to agree? Right.
Okay, boomer.
Yeah, but you're not
to the nth degree.
Exactly. But parameters by you and your limited perspective are dangerous. And yeah, I mean, young people need parameters in order to feel safe. But you don't do it the way you're doing it. And certainly all the stats show, and people will always default to it. Sometimes you just need to be smacked. Sometimes they just need to be spanked. Sometimes it's like, no, actually, I mean, I know that makes us feel better because we feel like it would be a quick solution. Mm-hmm. Stats show exactly the opposite. So anyway, what is the third camp?
Third camp is Pacific Coast Academy.
Oh, okay. That's the one. Now they're in Samoa. Right. So they've been scuttled around. So they're going to go farther out.
Yeah. Farther and farther away. But they do make the distinction. At this point, Steve is just a consultant, but he's changed his name. So weird.
Right. And also we have to put in here, like they keep going back and forth between Steve's wife and daughter. And his wife is talking about how they don't have any money. And I had to go back and get a job. Yes. And
after some very good years of the money rolling in.
A lot of money and a lot of wealth and a lot of extravagance. I mean, it's very clear that he definitely was living an extravagant lifestyle along with his family. And what an ironic twist, two of his children end up having pretty severe drug issues themselves, as well as behavioral issues, but we'll come back to that. So Steve has now realized that his name is poison due to all these lawsuits. So he's now just a consultant and starts up this Pacific Coast Academy. The section, the documentary is really driven by the testimonial of a man named Kurt, who was sent there as a teen. And it's reported the program is now costing between $25,000 and $30,000. And Kurt said that his mom sold their house for him to attend it. So he gets there and he realizes that he knows another participant from his hometown, and it's Costa Mesa here in Southern California. And her name is Amber. So we're going back and forth between his perspective and Amber's perspective. And he noted that the camp wasn't even built yet. The kids were building it. It was a forced labor camp. I'd also say that Amber's sharing is one of the ones that has a real arc and is really tragic. There is another young woman who shares her story. And I do want to give credence to the problems in crafting a narrative, or the choices made in creating a narrative, is that they present her narrative, not Amber's, but this other young woman's. They present her as like, I was problematic and I was doing this, and mom, just didn't know what to do. And I got there and I responded well. So they kind of set this up as like, okay, we're going to do a point counterpoint. But then later you find out her experience was not good.
Right.
So it's like, was she coached into doing that for dramatic effect? Because that's a problem. That's a problem if you are crafting your interviewees' responses. And
almost pinning them against each other in a way.
Right.
Yeah, I see that. Right. I see that. I didn't think about it in that way at the time, but I totally see how subconsciously I could have kind of thought, well, and I'm almost thinking stylistically, like Amber, they kind of shoot her very dark, and the other woman is kind of like light, airy. Oh, now you got me thinking.
Yeah. Right.
Feels purposeful now.
So Steve's daughter looks like a hotel room, a very well-appointed hotel room with lots of light, lots of beautiful hair and makeup. Her tresses are beautifully lit. And then we have Amber in another dark room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I don't know. Maybe those were their homes, but lighting is easy to do. Lighting, you're carrying lighting with you. So there are some things about the way this was shot and edited that I think are problematic. But back to the story, especially about Kurt.
Yeah. So yeah, Kurt gets there. He realizes, oh my God, I know this girl Amber from school and or from his hometown. And Amber, so we hear from Amber now, right? She's sitting on this couch, presumably in her home. But then we also get to see footage of Amber from when she is on the island. And we'll talk about this footage in a second as just how we got this. But she is basically standing there giving her testimonial, saying how she's been there for 16 months, which was wild to me. She talks about they're essentially asking her, like, what are the worst things that have happened to you here? So she says, I've been here 16 months. I have been hogtied as a punishment. Other students were involved in that. And then we cut back to Kurt and we realize Kurt starts talking and he gets very uncomfortable. And he says, yeah, one of the leaders was like, hey, if you become a junior staff member, meaning we'll give you some rank and authority, then you get like better food and some more benefits. And you realize that Kurt, that knows Amber from his hometown, is now inflicting punishment on her and is one of the ones that participates in hog-tying her. And not only is she hog-tied, but they start by throwing cups of water in her face that eventually turns into essentially waterboarding. I mean, buckets of water over her. She can't breathe. She's hog-tied. And Kurt alludes to that someone in an extremely high ranking, a staff member is ordering them to do all of this.
And again, why are names not revealed?
I know.
Or if you're choosing not to reveal all these other names of people, you're doing that for legal reasons, then why are you doing the documentary? If you're not going to be brave enough to name those people, then you're not really doing your job. That's my perspective on that.
I mean, all you have to do is you don't have to have Kurt say it. You can have some font on the screen saying, survivors reported that so-and-so was the one that, you don't even have to name it, that it's coming out of Kurt's mouth.
Or even to say, for legal reasons, we were not allowed to interview these people, or so-and-so refused interviews. Otherwise it's just the voice of this, he turns back into a kid when he's being interviewed too. You can tell that like everyone interviewed is going back to those moments of trauma, and it's, it doesn't seem like they're being taken care of very well during the process of making this documentary.
So Amber then talks, and this is also like, why are we sort of hiding these folks? But I don't know what's going on the other end. But she then talks about sexual abuse that she endured on the island, where she was being punished. So she gets sent to this other village for being punished, and the person overseeing that village, which they make it sound like, is somebody named Chief Tui.
No, he actually was a chief. He's like a chief. No, he's a chief of a tribe there. He was a very and very important person. They couldn't handle her because like, what do we do with somebody that we need to put in jail? So basically they put her in jail by sending her to the village. And when all the villagers went away, Chief Tui sexually assaulted her.
Oh my God. This is like blowing my mind. Like, I thought they had their own little villages set up I thought Chief Tui was like another horsehair.
No, it's like that was like the chief of the village.
Oh my God. So they're basically intermingling these kids with
the local whomever. Yeah, with the local.
Oh, even better. Great. Yeah. Okay. So anyway,
but isn't that interesting? Like, I mean, as a viewer, I think this is a great example. We watch these things and there are things that you pick up on that I don't. Yeah. There are things that I pick up on that maybe others don't. But that is, again, that's another sort of thing that's just talked about really quick. And I think they refer to it as like, well, he's the chief. When she tries to report, it's like, he wouldn't do that. He's a really nice guy.
Yeah.
What?
And how ironic that she's too much to handle for them. So they send her away. So Amber talks, she's a teen talking about being abused by him and then clearly not being addressed when she tries to report the abuse. And this just left me kind of like, it left hanging, right? And it cuts back to her as an adult and she's tearful and, certainly talks a little bit more in detail about what happened, but we really don't hear about any other allegations of this nothing. Like, she was at the camp for 16 months. Other girls were at that camp. Like, people had to know this was going on. It's not like she was the only one. And we're just left with no resolution about the sexual abuse that was occurring.
Yeah. I mean, at the footage of her talking about the abuse is taken from a video that was made by another kid on the island whose father kind of came and saw that shit was going down and got his kid like, hey, I need you to get, I mean, this is a very responsible man. And I would love to have heard more from him. He's like, this is going down. You got to get people to tell their stories. So Amber is telling her story. And then all these other kids are chiming in. Yeah, I've been here a year now. I've been hit 7 times. They're all emaciated, dirty, covered in insect bites, have numbers of scars on them. Mm-hmm. So that tape gets smuggled, and it does have to be smuggled out of the country because Steve has so much political power there.
Yep.
And what he does is he calls, he's like, hey, you know what? This would be really bad if this tape gets out, because think of how that would impair or impact your tourist industry, right? So they're able to get the tape out, even though he has to go through multiple interviews and customs and stuff. They get it to the U.S. Embassy. And at the same time it gets to the embassy, it hits the news and calling out Steve. And then the media just descend on his home and his family. So the embassy officials go, and like ghosts in the night, no one is at the camp, right?
Weird.
The children were moved, and they finally found that one really sick, emaciated kid told them that all the other children had been moved off the camp. So then comes the twist, or the bombshell in this documentary. Halfway in, you realize now that Steve has a son who started using substances heavily as a teen. So this guy's own kid is so out of control that Steve and his wife now send their son to the Samoa program.
Yes. So
ironic and mind-blowing.
I was like, what?
Right. Yeah.
Because there's no mention of him. Like, you see his daughter. You do see like an old family Christmas video, and there's a little boy there as well, but like, he's not interviewed. Zero
mention. They specifically evade, and I'm going to say the word evade, they evade disclosing that he has 4 kids. So I get that maybe you don't, maybe one of the kids says, I don't want to have anything to do with this, who's now an adult. You know, he has 2 children that we don't know what their stories are, except if you read follow-up articles, they're quite successful. As is the daughter who speaks. She's a successful therapist now. But that to me is a really poor, obvious choice to leave that information out. Like, even despite that there's this bombshell reveal, it's like, there are other kids too, and you haven't talked about this.
It would have been really easy just to state that.
Exactly.
And then kind of focus on the 2 and the stories. Yeah. So the wife talks about how out of control their son Dave was. They end up sending him at some point to the Samoa program. And then back at home, Steve's daughter, the one who participates in the documentary, starts talking about her own rebellion. I mean, really some serious stuff. She was using heroin, stealing from her parents, just, again, like, that is a lot of parents' worst nightmare, right? And it is very ironic that is happening in their home. She overdosed multiple times. She gets arrested and she's in jail. And the mom talks about, hey, we learned with Dave that bailing him out was a bad idea. So we just left her in there. Like, the daughter, this is her first time in jail, and they just leave her because of their experience with their son. And it's obviously just there's a lot of turmoil.
There's a very narrow perspective, clearly, that the wife is still parroting all these years later.
Yeah.
Very, very limited perspective. And I would even say, with all due respect, I appreciate that his daughter is taking part in this. I appreciate that she had a lot of difficulties. And I am glad to hear that maybe she's chosen as her life's work to help other people. Mm-hmm. But what I don't see, and I don't know if this is on her or if it's on the filmmaker, is that there is no critiquing of her dad and the choices he made, other than to say, what about us? You have a family at home. What about us? I just think, look, I am not alone in this. I have many colleagues that have had traumatic issues in their family, and you have to come to a place where you can say, I'm not responsible for this, but I do have to acknowledge what my loved one has done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's not my fault. This is what has happened. I'm not saying this person is evil. I'm just saying that they did some really bad things and they shouldn't have done it, and there needs to be repair. And that's something that I don't hear here. And I would want to give the possibility that she wasn't given the opportunity for that, but it needed to be said. There's just no responsibility. And frankly, Steve's wife, and I'm choosing not to use her name. There just seems to be a complete detachment from reality.
Yeah. But his daughter, she talks about ultimately realizing herself, I need to get myself into recovery.
True.
And so it's like she makes her own decision despite parents' influence or what have you. So at the end of this documentary, we learn that Dave is in prison and still in prison. And, it gives, I think despite what you just said, I think it does give us at least a little bit of insight to what was going on with a perpetrator's family that we don't often get in a documentary.
Yeah.
And maybe their participation was their very subtle way of saying, we're acknowledging that he did some bad things. Although I agree with you, I think it needs to have been explicitly.
And let me go back, if I'm riling people up by saying this, I do have compassion for everybody involved, for his sons, for his daughters, for his wife, because as I'll say a little bit later, if we looked at this through the framework of coercive control and domestic violence, it is very easy to get sucked into that dynamic. And then you make excuses and it becomes your paradigm for life. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that he beat his children, beat his wife. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not even implying that. I'm saying that there are personality issues and dominance and control that can very much, like in every cult leader, that determines not only the cult at large, but their family in the immediacy. So I do think that the interviews with the family members were helpful and they served a purpose. I think they could have done more. I just think overall that's sort of the recurring theme for me, is that more could have been done with this. Yeah. Because whether it was intended or not, or it was edited to present a very certain narrow narrative, there's an incredible amount of entitlement, denial, displacement, and there's even some victimhood going on. I completely acknowledge as a clinician that victimhood mindset can exist in the totality and true sense of actually being a victim, right? Because in our personal growth, in our evolution, we have to get to a point where we're able to look at both those things, to look at that dialectic and say, these things happen to me. I have these predilections. I have these behaviors because of it. And now I have to take responsibility and separate myself from those. But there's just like there's some mental gymnastics going on in the family as well, I think. So to build on that with great compassion, and maybe I'm not sounding compassionate about them, but I really am.
You are.
I believe that they're pretty much textbook examples of what happens to people as a result of being raised by or married to individuals with very, very strong narcissistic qualities.
Absolutely.
So Cardizano truly believes that there's a rampant cultural shift with teens becoming more lost and dangerous, but he believes his own bullshit in the way that many people with personality disorders do, as they create their reality as they walk through life. Cardizano believes that he is the answer to this issue. I've got the answer because I myself, and here's what I'm sure he thinks is a big bombshell really reveal that he shares in all of his publicity materials. It's like, I was a troubled teen. I was these kids, and military fixed it for me. It's like, no, you were able to modify your behaviors within a military structure. And because of your ability to speak and your ability to navigate that, you then were imbued with power by promotions. And now that's only backed up what your bullshit belief system is. Right. That's just the way that this works. The most indicative to this narcissism is also this edge of criminality, in that he does not back down. He has shown over and over again that it fails. It does not work. People are hurt. He does not back down from it. And this is something that the family interviews do help with, is that at one point his wife and daughter are begging him, do something else, please do something else. And he will not back down.
Right.
Maybe he doesn't feel like he can do anything else. But, most people, I would think, faced with a situation like this would go, wow, this is really messed up. I got to figure something out. Maybe I go change my name, or maybe I start an LLC and then go sell cars. I'm a good salesman.
He's smart. Like, yeah, you
there's
could pick
so
a
many
gazillion other things.
so many other things, right?
And I do think it is, that piece where, okay, here's America's problem and I am the answer. I am the only one. It is very akin to what we see when we talk about, and of course, I'm not like saying that he would have gone down this road. So please don't misunderstand what I'm saying, but it's very similar of the mentality and the narcissistic flavor that we do see with mass casualty perpetrators, where they're like, it's just me. Like the grievance, I have to be the change.
Yeah.
And
it's not going to happen without me.
Yeah. I have to go through with this violence. So everybody sees and finally understands. And that never works out.
No, never does. So folks, if you want to do a deep dive into the history of these programs and the other types of reform schools and crimes that are associated with them, please go back and listen to our episode entitled Scared Straight Reform Schools. And it was episode number 152. Yeah.
I think the only other point where it would have been helpful to see a subject matter expert would just be a therapist in there talking about trauma again, and kind of the responses of the survivors and their families, especially with Kristen's family, with the one death that was, you think giving, kind of benefit to these parents, you think you're sending your kid off to a good program, then it's going to make them a better person and a better adult. And they don't come back from that. I can't imagine the level of guilt that those parents felt layered on top of their trauma and what Kristen went through. So that would have been interesting. I think there's other places to kind of fill this documentary out, as we've already said. And we always get kind of judgy when documentaries are way too long. So again, I understand that this is a dance between interesting stuff and a fully formed informational documentary.
Oh, yeah, completely agree. And along the lines of that, I'd go back to the scene of the now adult man who had been through the program, purchased by his father, and they're sitting on the dock. And it's sort of implied, I mean, I may be reading this wrong, but I read that as that this was actually a somewhat wealthy family, because dad is elderly, dressed in sort of like Boca Raton golfing outfit on a pier or a dock or something. And their son, who is a nice looking man, but he looks like he's been through a lot. He just has the face of it. The look in his eyes is, this is a person who has seen a lot of life, and he is containing himself very well. He is expressing himself well. He's also appears to be navigating the tension between him and his dad. And then they cut to the dad, and the dad is absolutely immovable that he did the right thing. Appears to be unwilling to admit that it might have been a bad decision.
Well, and it's so interesting. And just, again, if someone hasn't seen it, there is some footage of when the son is away in Costa Rica somewhere, and the father actually comes for a visit. And the father says, I am not an emotional person. Like, I keep all that on the inside. And the son turns around and sees his dad. It's supposed to be kind of this like surprise moment, like out of a Survivor television show where your loved one comes to visit. Right. And the son is just sobbing. Obviously, this is a very icy dad, right? And he has sent his son away, but his son is so overcome with seeing his father. He's grabbing onto his legs and sobbing. And the dad's just kind of standing there, but hugging him. And then we hear his narration saying, that really got all my emotions. So then cut back to them sitting on the dock, and the dad has to kind of throw in his now adult son's face, as soon as you came back from that program, though, it was like a week and you were back using drugs. And the son goes, well, no, it was a little bit more time than that, but yeah, you're right. And the dad just says, you know what? Sometimes I think we should have left you down there forever. And you're right. Like, the son has obviously done a lot of work, and he's navigating him, and he's like, should have left me down there forever, just kind of mirrors his comment back to him. I think that was one of the most impactful scenes of the whole thing. And we don't even get to hear a ton from them.
But. No. I mean, it's interesting because they might have been too afraid to use it. But again, to me, that's somebody that's worked on themselves. Yeah. And it also was reflective of just how unbelievably challenging addiction can be in different individuals. There are people
Sure.
who go through a period of addiction and go through a period of really hard times in their lives, and they come out of it, and substances no longer have a hold on them,
Yeah.
like to the point where maybe they drink socially or they use socially, and it has no impact on their life. And yes, I know that there are 12 steppers out there right now that are absolutely
Right.
not having it. I respect where you're coming from. However, I'm talking stats, because I'm talking about there are some people that are genetically hardwired to have more challenges in pulling away from self-medication and usage. And that's just, I'm not saying that's what's going on in this particular situation, but that poor guy, just reflecting back to his dad, should have left me down there.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So in our previous episodes, we've referred to the counterpoint of a book called The Gift of Fear, because it's a great book. Even Dr. Shiloh talks about how it was very important to her, right? When you
Yep.
first read it, Gavin de Becker. And then I refer to, like I said, The Counterpoint, a really great book by a journalist named Barry Glassner called The Culture of Fear. It's a book, it's probably 20 years old. There's been a couple of updates. I highly, highly recommend it. It's at the library, download it on your Kindle and read it. And Glassner explores the phenomenon of ongoing fear mongering in contemporary society and the impact that it has on various social groups. And especially, he has a whole chapter on teenagers. Glassner argues that teenagers have been unjustly vilified and stigmatized in the media and public discourse for literally generations. And he illustrates this with significantly similar US newspaper articles from each decade for the last 90 years
Oh my gosh.
that talk about the teenagers are out of control and they're basically going to like ruin the world and everything is
Right.
all shit and it's all the teenagers' fault.
Well, we've covered that in our vintage episodes where they're like,
Right.
these youths.
These youths. Glassner contends that this vilification is based on sensationalism, stereotypes, and this very distorted perception of teenage behavior. And that in itself serves to preserve the dominant or adult population's ideas of themselves as virtuous. It's not me that's changing. I've
Mhm.
always been virtuous, or I had my problems and I bootstrapped myself. It's these youths.
Yep.
So anyway, he highlights how the media does this and tends to. Anyway, Glassner highlights how the media sensationalizes these incidents, particularly isolated ones, and then portrays it as a threat, blows it up. But then the media also downplays the positive aspects of adolescent development. So yeah, if anybody is really interested in sort of a very fascinating and entertaining view on this, sort of the Hollywood historical that's actually quite accurate in this one scene, there's a movie that is shown on TCM every year at Christmas, which is Meet Me in St. Louis. Very famous Judy Garland movie. Very famous song, Clang, Clang, Clang with the Trolley, which has its own meme on Saturday Night Live. But one of the things that's really fascinating then is to watch these two, an adolescent and a pre-adolescent girl, and what they do to celebrate Halloween. And just that they were talking like really over the top language and engaging in like moderate levels of vandalism. And it was accepted. It's like, oh, this is what kids do on this night. But it's shocking for people sometimes. I go, oh, you got to watch Meet Me in St. Louis. And then they'll come back and they'll go, Tootie was a monster. It's like, no, she was a kid at the turn of the century. That's not a monster. It's like that we have to have a cultural and perspective shift on this, right?
Interesting. I like that. Yeah. So as this, documentary's wrapping up, it's kind of this rapid fire, conclusion where you're sort of hearing from most people that they've interviewed. And
oh wait, I know what's coming. Go ahead. I know what's coming now.
So everyone is kind of like back on the other side where they're like, Steve wasn't really a bad guy. He just kind of lost his way. A horsehair does say like, when you started seeing him pull up in a Ferrari, I think that's when he lost his way. It was just about the money.
Really? That was it? That was it, horsehair? Astute observation. Thank you.
It's almost as if they're just sort of plucking out these whimsical good qualities about Steve. Right. And then his attorney, who represented him in the trials after Kristen's death, says, yep, and you know what? He never paid me. he totally stiffed his attorney, which I was like, oh, what a fucking shocker.
Well, and how familiar does that sound in today's discourse regarding a major political narcissist who has not paid a single attorney in years, right?
I mean, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. But you do, they talk about, some of these survivors finding each other on the Facebook groups. And then we do have the woman that we were speaking about earlier that talks about how this program, how she was out of control. And she feels like this program sort of worked for her to some extent. And then she talks about this portion of one of the programs that she was put in called the Solo program, where she was 13 years old. And basically she was like a runner between a couple of like the camps or villages, but this was in Hawaii. And she would have to be in the wilderness by herself. But it was also like this sort of, to me, it sounded like this advanced level of like, okay, you're kind of finding yourself and can you do this? And,
right.
Testing your limits, if you will. So all she has is basically a handheld radio. And she said she always found Steve to be very kind, and that he would basically say, when you're scared out there in the wilderness, I'm on the other end of the radio. Call me if you need anything. And that he would kind of like check in with her.
So let's put a bookmark in there. You're special.
You are special.
I will take care of you. Call me when you need me. Okay. Yep. Keep going.
I'm the big boss, but I'm going to give you the individual attention you need. So one time she's like, here I am. My skin is so gross and dry and I'm out here in the wilderness. And I ask him if he can bring me like some skin lotion.
I think he says, is there anything you need? And she says, can I have some lotion?
Yeah. Yeah. So he brings it to her, but as you can imagine, it goes all bad because he doesn't just bring it to her. He starts applying it to her. He ends up sexually assaulting her. And, this woman who had talked so well about the program and about Steve up until now, obviously there's this turn. And she says, not until I was getting ready and prepping for this documentary did I realize he was grooming me this whole time.
And also
completely grooming me.
And in the act of sexually assaulting her, he says, think of me as your father.
Oh, yeah.
So, regardless of what, I get it. I mean, we shouldn't hold family members responsible for the actions of their relatives, no matter what the family dynamics are. I think we have to be very, very careful about that. But this is a really big deal. Like everything that we've said so far about the inappropriateness, this is a completely different level of Jim Jones-like activity, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the point where it's culty, where he's just justifying his actions with a 13-year-old girl.
And she's completely dismissed by her mom when she reports it to her.
Right, exactly. So despite years of documented abuse and fatalities, these programs lack federal oversight and they result in a lack of substantial regulations. One of the things that comes up in the documentary that really tanked him was when the insurance companies realized, wait, we're paying out hundreds of thousands of dollars for these treatment camps, and there's no licensed therapist, there's no psychologist, there's no social workers, there's nobody there. We got to investigate that. And that was one of the things that got him running in the beginning. There are other operational camps that continue to exist, including Blue Fire, Rites of Passage, and the Outback Therapeutic Expeditions. And they assert to offer wilderness therapy to their predominantly unwilling participants. So despite all these actions and all the accusations levied against him over the years, Cardizano was never convicted on any criminal charges. He died at age 63 in 2019 from a heart attack after battling stage 4 colon cancer for several years.
We also want to take a moment to differentiate between wilderness camps and the better alternative, which are therapeutic communities. But again, it depends on how these programs are deployed. So teen therapeutic communities have several primary goals. Firstly, they aim to provide a safe and structured environment for adolescents facing behavioral, emotional, or substance abuse issues, and they are fully assessed for that before they are allowed to participate in the program.
Or to even be considered for them, right?
Right, because can they even meet the needs where this particular individual is at? But in contrast to wilderness camps, therapeutic communities focus on therapy by licensed clinicians and counseling to address underlying issues and teach coping strategies.
So the other part of this is that therapeutic communities emphasize the importance of peer support and healthy relationships. The goal is to help the participants build social skills and improve their communication. And thirdly, these communities are looking to foster personal growth and self-awareness. So they may be finding areas of needed development within the family structure, and they're encouraging teens to take responsibility for their actions. Much like Steve was saying from the beginning, is like, I want kids to take responsibility for their actions. There's nothing wrong with that, but it has to be delivered in a structured environment if it's not being delivered that way at home. They're also offered the opportunity to learn how to make positive choices given their particular challenges. So again, just exempling that teens with wildly different challenges in their lives are not to be put into the same environments or the same structures. And ultimately, the goal in therapeutic communities is to help teenagers develop the tools and resilience that they need to overcome these challenges, and then hopefully build healthier lives and then reintegrate back into their families and communities. Again, one of the problems, and I've talked about this before, is that this is what people with substance use and addiction problems face, is that somebody can go and get clean. They can do a month in rehab, 2 months, 3 months in rehab, or maybe they're in transitional sober living, and then they return to the environment of the family. And maybe the family was right. Maybe this person, because of their substance use, was a fuck up or caused a lot of damage. Completely acknowledge that. But the family has to use critical thinking to understand how the environment contributed to it and what they can do to change. And that's something that, again, the documentary completely drops the ball on, is challenging any of these parents to really talk about what was going on and what they had tried. All of them that are shown in this documentary are just people that threw their hands up and like, well, I didn't know what to do.
Yeah. I mean, any treatment program where one individual is sort of separated from their environment or their family for whatever reason, whether it's substance disorders or mood disorders, suicidality, what have you, an aftercare program is so important for that transition. You can't just go from one and then back to life the way it was and try and navigate your new way of thinking and all these skills without the support of some kind of aftercare program. And your family or support system, whoever that is, should be brought in to help understand how you all need to work on that together. I mean, it's what you and I dealt with all the time with parolees getting out of prison is, okay, you went from one environment to another.
Yeah. How do we reintegrate you into this? And in order, in a way that, I mean, if your resources are limited and you have to go back to where you came from, how do you navigate that and not end up back in prison? Again, you know, the whole fucked up idea about these types of camps is that they were going to sculpt and create this little supposedly fully rehabilitated and now non-problematic teen and put them back in the environment that probably contributed, at least to some extent, why they got there. So anyway, in terms of ratings, I gave this a 3 minus.
Minus brains.
3 minus brains, or maybe 2.5. I don't know. I'm left with too many questions, just too many unexplored avenues. Again, Reddit is filled with stories from survivors of these camps, horror stories, actually. And where are they? Why didn't producers provide more stories, more information, more context? It felt like the survivors that were interviewed were not really given an opportunity to share. I did give it the 3, though, because I think this is a very important story to tell. It's just necessary because people need to know that this is actually a thing that happens in our world today. And I think that the documentary style does a disservice. It intentionally leaves out information. Like I said, Cardizano had 4 kids. 2 of them remain out of the documentary spotlight. Completely respect that. The daughter who was interviewed is a therapist, and you know, it looks like she has found her way, and wish her the best, wish his wife the best. But, you know, his son is currently in prison for stalking charges. He's eligible.
Is that what it is?
He's eligible for parole this year, but it's, you know, he had a very challenging life after the program.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I actually gave it much lower. I gave it a 2 brains. The pros for me, actually think it did give a good voice to the victims. I think the interviews felt respectful. Like they were kind of meeting them where they were at with whatever they were willing to share. This is my call. Like, I would love for every true crime documentary from now on to be able to post, like at the beginning, we had victim advocates and support on set for these victims.
Yeah.
I know in the UK they do it. Very little productions are doing it here. Our friend Lenora Claire has a whole consulting group that is built around hopefully making this the norm in Hollywood. But if I could just read that you had victim support for these people on set to tell their stories when they're ready to tell their stories, or to stop some questioning when it got inappropriate, I'd feel so much better about consuming these documentaries and stop like having to guess necessarily if they were being treated well or not. But I agree with you. I mean, this story absolutely needs to be told. That's why documentaries exist, I feel, for a lot of these, is we need to know what happened. And the footage that was able to be embedded in this, I think, made it really bring it to life rather than just someone telling a story about, kids on an island somewhere. So that was compelling. I was just left wanting more. I was left angry and I was left wanting more.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that makes for a great documentary. I also found it a little bit slow. So very important story, but it was fine,
Yeah. Again,
2.0 fine.
Do you think you would have had a different perspective if there had been some subject matter experts?
I don't know. I mean, I don't really think it absolutely needed that, but maybe that's because I'm kind of filling it in myself and kind of looking through the lens of our tradecraft, which is why we do these documentary review episodes. But it could have been helpful here and there. But again, I think you risk shoving too much in and then we're like, where does it end?
Yeah.
Because I liked that it was only 90 minutes.
True.
But here we are, like, we're left wanting more.
But if it was constructed better, then you might have been better served by additional episodes or maybe 3 45-minute slots or something. Yeah.
For sure. All right. There we go. Hell Camp. Let us know your recommendations.
Another episode longer than the episode itself.
I know. Oh my gosh. All right, everyone. Well, let us know what you want to watch next. If you do want our thoughts on American Nightmare, we can certainly, at least talk about that somewhere on some forum at some point. But make sure you guys join us this weekend. We do have a live stream on the 27th, Saturday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we will be talking to some other folks about their journey into forensic psychology and some forensic adjacent fields that are really, really interesting. And we got some great participants. So please join us over on our YouTube channel for that.
So thank you, folks, bearing with us. Again, any other suggestions for documentaries? We love having them lined up to go. And we will see you next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Bye, folks.
Bye-bye. We sincerely thank you for spending some time with us today. LA Not So Confidential is part of the Crawl Space Media Network in partnership with Glassbox Media. Each episode is hosted, produced, and written by Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh. Our post-production editing and sweetening magic is handled by the multi-talented Jason Usry of Ear Cult Productions.
The LA Not So Confidential theme, entitled Cool Vibes Film Noir, is composed and performed by the talented Kevin MacLeod. He graciously allows us to use his music via a Creative Commons Attribution license, and you can check out all of Kevin's amazing work on YouTube.
All of the resources for each episode can be found on our website at la-not-so-confidential.com. You can find us on Instagram at LA Not So Podcast, on Twitter at LA Not So Pod, and on Facebook at LA Not So Confidential. Media inquiries and bookings are scheduled at alienistentertainment@gmail.com.
Please join us each month on Saturdays at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for a live streaming and very interactive broadcast on YouTube entitled Behind the Couch. Stay tuned to all of our social media for our live streaming scheduling announcements.
Subscribe to LA Not So Confidential so you never miss a new episode. And lastly, we'd be honored if you joined our Patreon at patreon.com/LA Not So Podcast. With a subscription, you get an ad-free listening experience, and you'll be the first notified about upcoming live events, social gatherings, and super cool swag coming your way.
Thanks for listening, and join in with us next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Bye, folks.